Chapter 30, Part 3. He showed his understanding of the situation by his next action. He left the motor running. I put my foot on the accelerator and clutch, jiggled the gear shift, and raised both feet. With an ominous roar, we leaped out of the yard. As we shook onto the shelf of the road, the car nearly stalled, and I stamped both feet again on the pedal and clutch. We made no progress, and an awful amount of noise, but the motor didn't stop. I understood then that in order to go forward, I would have to lift my feet off the pedals, and if I did so abruptly, the car would shake like a person with St. Vitus dance. With that complete understanding of the principle of motor locomotion, I drove down the mountainside toward IKWtCBS, some 50 miles away. It is hard to understand why my vivid imagination and tendency towards scariness didn't provide me with gory scenes of bloody crashes on Risco de Mexico. I can only think that my every sense was concentrated on steering the bucking car. When it became totally dark, I fumbled over knobs, twisting and pulling until I succeeded in finding the lights. The car slowed down as I centered on that search, and I forgot to step on the pedals, and the motor gurgled. The car pitched and the engine stopped. A bumbling sound from the back told me that Dad had fallen off the seat. I had been expecting this to happen for miles. I pulled the handbrake and carefully considered my next move. It was useless to think of asking Dad. The fall on the floor had failed to stir him, and I would be unable to do so. No car was likely to pass us. I hadn't seen any motor vehicles since we passed the guard's house early in the day. We were headed downhill, so I reasoned that with any luck we might coast right up to Calexico, or at least to the guard. I waited until I formulated an approach to him before releasing the brake. I would stop the car when we reached the kiosk and put on my sidity air. I would speak to him like the peasant he was. I would order him to start the car and then tip him a quarter or even $1 from Dad's pocket before driving on. With my plans solidly made, I released the brake and we began coasting down the slope. I also pumped the clutch and the accelerator, hoping that the action would speed our descent. And wonder of wonders, the motor started again. The Hudson went crazy on the hill. It was rebelling and would have leaped over the side of the mountain to all our destruction in its attempt to unseat me had I relaxed control for a single second. The challenge was exhilarating. It was me, Marguerite, against the elemental opposition. As I twisted the steering wheel and forced the accelerator to the floor, I was controlling Mexico, and might, and aloneness, and inexperienced youth, and Bailey Johnson Sr., and death, and insecurity, and even gravity. After what seemed like 1,001 nights of challenge, the mountain began to level off, and we started passing scattered lights on either side of the road. No matter what happened after that, I had won. The car began to slow down, as if it had been tamed and was going to give up without grace. I pumped even harder, and we finally reached the guard's box. I pulled on the handbrake and came to a stop. There would be no need for me to speak to the guard, since the motor was running, but I had to wait until he looked into the car and gave me the signal to continue. He was busy talking to people in a car facing the mountain I had just conquered. The light from his hut showed him bent from the waist, with his upper torso completely swallowed by the mouth of the open window. I held the car in instant readiness for the next lap of our journey. When the guard unfolded himself and stood erect, I was able to see he was not the same man of the morning's embarrassment. I was understandably taken aback at the discovery, and when he saluted sharply and barked, "Pasa," I released the brake, put both feet down, and lifted them a bit too sharply. The car outran my intention. It leaped not only forward, but left as well, and with a few angry spurts, propelled itself onto the side of the car, just pulling off. The crash of scraping metal was followed immediately by a volley of Spanish hurled at me from all directions. Again, strangely enough, fear was absent from my sensations. I wondered in this order: was I hurt? Was anyone else hurt? Would I go to jail? What were the Mexicans saying? And finally, had Dad awakened? I was able to answer the first and last concern promptly, buoyed by the adrenaline that had flooded my brain as we careened down the mountainside. I had never felt better, and my father's snores cut through the cacophony of protestations outside my window. I got out of the car, intending to ask for the policias, but the guard beat me to the punch. He said a few words which were strung together like beads, but one of them was policias. As the people in the other car fumbled out, I tried to recover my control and said loudly and too graciously, "Gracias, señor." The family, some 8 or more people of every age and size, walked around me, talking heatedly and sizing me up as if I might have been a statue in a city park. And they were a flock of pigeons. One said, "Joven," meaning I was young. I tried to see which one was so intelligent I would direct my conversation to him or her, but they shifted positions so quickly it was impossible to make the person out. Then another suggested borracho. Well, certainly I must have smelled like a tequila farm since Dad had been breathing out the liquor in noisy respirations, and I had kept the windows closed against the cold night air. It wasn't likely that I would explain that to these strangers, even if I could, which I couldn't. Someone got the idea to look into the car, and a scream brought us all up short. People, they seemed to be in the hundreds, crowded to the windows, and more screams erupted. I thought for a minute that something awful might have happened. Maybe at the time of the crash, I too pushed to the window to see, but then I remembered the rhythmic snores and coolly walked away. The guard must have thought he had a major crime on his hands. He made moves and sounds like, "Watch her," or "Don't let her out of your sight." The family came back, this time not as close but more menacing, and when I was able to sort out one coherent question, "¿Quién es?" I answered dryly, and with all the detachment I could summon, "Mi padre." Being a people of close family ties and weekly fiestas, they suddenly understood the situation. I was a poor little girl thing who was caring for my drunken father who had stayed too long at the fair. Pobrecita. The guard, the father, and the one of the 2 small children began the Herculean job of waking Dad. I watched coolly as the remaining people paraded, making figure 8s around me and their badly bruised automobile. The 2 men shook and tugged and pulled while the children jumped out and down, up and down on my father's chest. I credit the children's action for the success of the effort. Bailey Johnson Sr. woke up in Spanish. "¿Qué tiene? ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué quiere?" Anyone else would have asked, "Where am I?" Obviously, this was a common Mexican experience. When I saw he was fairly lucid, I went to the car, calmly pushed the people away, and said from the haughty level of one who has successfully brought to heel a marauding car and negotiated a sneaky mountain, "Dad, there's been an accident." He recognized me by degrees and became my pre-Mexican fiesta father. "An accident, huh? Who was at fault? You, Marguerite? Was it you?" It would have been futile to tell him of my mastering his car and driving it nearly 50 miles. I didn't expect or even need now his approbation. "Yes, Dad, I ran into a car." He still hadn't sat up completely, so he couldn't know where we were. But from the floor where he rested, as if that was the logical place to be, he said, "In the glove compartment, the insurance papers. Get them and, give them to the police and then come back." The guard struck his head in the other door before I could form a scathing but polite response. He asked Dad to get out of the car. Never at a loss, my father reached in the glove compartment and took out the folded papers and a half a bottle of liquor he had left there earlier. He gave the guard one of his pinch-backed laughs and descended by joints from the car. Once on the ground, he towered over the angry people. He took a quick reading of his location and the situation, and then put his arm around the other driver's shoulder. He kindly, not in the least condescendingly, bent to speak to the guard, and the three men walked into the hut. Within easy minutes, laughter burst from the shack, and the crisis was over, but so was the enjoyment. Dad shook hands with all the men, patted the children, and smiled winsomely at the women. Then, and without looking at the damaged cars, he eased himself behind the steering wheel. He called me to get in, and as if he had not been helplessly drunk a half hour earlier, he drove unerringly toward home. He said he didn't know I could drive, and how did I like his car? I was angry that he had recovered so quickly, and felt let down that he didn't appreciate the greatness of my achievement. So I answered yes to both the statement and the question. Before he reached the border, he rolled down the window, and the fresh air, which was welcome, was uncomfortably cold. He told me to get his jacket from the back seat and put it on. We drove into the city in a cold and private silence.